All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for your patience. I'm Can. I'm here with Linkso, and we've got Randy with Malibu Compost again. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but we're up and running. Welcome, Randy. The floor is all yours.
All right. Hey, Ken, thank you very much. And thanks to Linkso always for the support and having me on. And it's super cool. And everybody, I am sorry that we had a little snafu. But, you know, I'm not the greatest technical guy. But anyway, so we're here today for organic gardening tips for spring. And you know, I'm the founder of Malibu Compost. We make real organic, farm-made, non-GMO soil compost, biodynamic compost on our farms, and then make some soils and compost teas and that kind of stuff. So that's who I am. All right, now let's see. Please go to the next slide. All right. Yes. Hey, look at that. It's working. All right, so this is kind of a joke. I put this slide up here, organic gardening, since we're talking about organic gardening. Obviously, these are not things that any of us organic gardeners would be using, but hey, I just thought the wall of death is always a good place to start an organic gardening class with. So organic, I always ask this, you know, who out there is an organic gardener, a grower, a farmer, teacher, student, consumer? Why? Generally, you know, the answer to that question would be it's healthier, it's safer, it's better for the environment. Those are all really good reasons. I'll throw in a reason. I eat organic, grow organic, and last year I had a medical issue that the doctor actually came to me afterwards and he said, hey, keep doing what you're doing. One of those things being eat organic and grow organic food and exercise on the farm and in the garden and keep your spiritual practices up. He said, because the 12 guys I had with the same profile as you that came into the hospital in an emergency from a COVID-related situation, they all died and you didn't. And the only thing that I can see that you do differently is you're a hardcore organic food eater, grower, farmer, tree hugger. Keep doing what you're doing. So same question here is who eats, buys, shops for organic food and products and why? Same reason. They're better, they're safer, they're healthier. And I'm going to address those in a second before we get into the gardening part of this thing. Where did organic come from? You know, the word organic, came from organon. And then we got into organic in the sense of some of Bacon's reasoning studies. We started looking at that again, and then we got into organic as this whole thing in the 80s in Europe, and then in the 90s in the United States, with organic then going from logic from Aristotle and reasoning from Bacon, and lands itself in the National Organic Program and the US government in terms of looking at and defining what is organic. So organic is basically defined as growing without any use of synthetics or chemicals or pesticides. That's what it is defined as. For those of you that don't know who's in charge of organic, well, here it's the USDA organic, that little green logo. And even more than the USDA organic, the department that actually runs the NOP, or the National Organic Program for the United States, is the AMS, which is the Agricultural Marketing Services. And I always find this interesting because, you know, the marketing services denotes to me that marketing why marketing? Why not like why didn't they create a new organic division, or why didn't they have a biological division? Like we see Biologique, a lot of times, in Canada and France and other parts of Europe. Why did they have the agricultural marketing services run the organic program in the US? Well, at the end of the day, when I started, there wasn't anything called organic. There was natural, there was holistic, and I was an organic. I was not organic because there wasn't organic. I was a landscaper who was coming out of traditional landscaping and working with a bunch of old guys that look like me now. And I, as a surfer, wanted to. I had people that were interested in doing, eco landscaping and holistic and natural landscaping. And this is back in the '80s, and so I started getting these clients in the entertainment business, and everybody wanted, these nature-friendly gardens. And so what happened ultimately is I bought that company and created this company called Eco Partners, and we were the first ecological landscape company in Los Angeles. And we did a lot of great stuff, did a lot of, created a lot of different protocols and stuff that are still with us today. And then I got into making compost. And so what's happened is we have this whole national organic program that started back in the 1990s, and in the early 2000s became law here in the US, and became the governing board. And so the Agricultural Marketing Services runs the National Organic Standards Board, and basically is in charge of what is and what is not organic. The market today, when I started, it was at zero, and the market today is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. So it's become a real thing. And so when you look at like, why does the marketing services run organic today, it's because we are in a, agriculture's big business, and big chem and big ag are joined at the hip, and they run the whole organics market, basically, even though there's an organic sector to it, and it's worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and going more and more and more all the time. So organic tips for spring. So that's our little backstory on organic, and hopefully that helps. Hopefully, if you find organic confusing, or you find like, hey, if I'm buying stuff that's labeled organic that I'm not really sure that is organic, then maybe that's the reason why. Because what we did with the government is we created a lot of different protocols where you could use non-organic means in organic growing, and it creates a lot of confusion. So one of the things I say to people all the time is do as much research as you can. Dig as deep as you can. That's the best thing that you can do for you. So what we're looking at right here is, this is our old property in Thousand Oaks, California, and that was a lawn. And so what we did, it was off the side of the property, and this was about a little over half an acre site that we kind of turned into a little urban homestead, urban farm deal. So we took all the lawn out of there, and what we were doing here, we were growing potatoes and radishes in there. And after we took the lawn out, what we did is we which I'll talk a little bit about in the protocols of what we're going to do here. But what we did here to prepare this, because it had been grown with lawn, right? So I did a couple things that are very unique. I used a product called SLF 100 out here, which is a bacterial enzyme. And I was concerned with if there was going to be any kind of toxins or poisons in the soil. Did some soil tests, saw a couple little things. It wasn't that bad. So what we did is we drenched this whole area with SLF 100, the bacterial enzymes. And then I started making compost teas, which I'm going to talk about a little bit further. I'm really a big compost tea advocate. And so I started drenching this whole area with compost tea. Then, and this is after we stripped the lawn, got everything out of there. And then I started composting it, little small amounts of composting with frequency, watering it in and running compost tea drenches over it. What you're looking at now is I planted potatoes in there and I planted radishes in there. And then we harvested those, in very early spring and got everything ready, because what I started doing was then taking this same area and I planted my tomatoes in there, and it was really became really good soil. And by now we're 3 years down the road and that soil is phenomenal. So if you think you can't grow where the lawn was, you certainly can, because that was just a lawn off the side of a yard. And up behind that wall there was a hill that we took some stuff down, some trees down that weren't doing well, and we created a whole orchard. There may be some pictures in here later, but I'll show you those if they're in there. So compost and composting, doesn't that look good? Isn't that a yummy little spoonful of compost? So for me, being a composter, that whole thing that you're looking at right there, just that scoop of that changed my life. When I met Alan York at Benzinger Vineyards, a long time ago, early 2000s, 2006 or 2007, that meeting with him to look at his biodynamic compost at Benzinger Vineyards really kind of changed my life. And I remember distinctly holding compost in my hand, talking to Alan, who was a great, wise, amazing bohemian character. And I'm holding this compost in my hand, and I'm just, I'm thinking to myself like, wow, I'm having like an out-of-body experience here, Alan. For some reason, I just keep thinking my life is going to change. My life is going to change. And that, what you're looking at right there, is what changed my life. That's a scoop of our finished compost. So there's a lot of different types of compost out there. I know you guys, like, in South Bay, there's the municipal compost down there. I throw a shock and awe picture in there of municipal compost, because the truth is, like, what's underneath that green bin that we're looking at right there is from where we used to live down in Santa Monica, California. That was one of our green bins. And I used to just go around. I got some pictures of inside green bins that are just mind blowing, of like what's in there, like lots of trash, lots of diapers, metal, dog poop bags, all kinds of stuff that doesn't, belong in a yard scrap bag and recycling bin. And I talk about that too, because if you think about, like, you're an organic gardener, right? Or an organic homesteader, or whatever you're doing, or you're part of a organic community garden. Think about all the people out there that spray Roundup in their yards and spray poison in their yards and spray pesticide in their yards. And when stuff dies, or they've got to cut stuff off that they've sprayed with pesticide, where do they put it? Most people put it in their green bin. That live in single waste stream communities. And that's like insane, but it's what happens. And so right there, in terms of getting city waste or green waste compost, or any compost that you buy that has green waste in it, there you go. That's the reason I'm not a big fan of green waste compost, because you've got too much toxin, too much toxicity. It's too big of a pool, and it's a great idea that doesn't work really that well. And that actually is shot. The picture on the right is at a municipal composting facility, and that is totally not okay in terms of, if you're going to then get allegedly finished green waste compost and put it in a school garden or a free compost giveaway, or some of it they sell for people to put in their bag soils. So to me, out. So what's so great about green waste compost? What are the people, green waste recycling? How composted is the green waste compost that comes in, in the free city compost or the community gardens that school use? And what are the long-term effects of using green waste compost in your soil. Like, let's say there's toxic residue in that. So what's the result of that? The result of that is we put this green waste compost, we put this that's allegedly composted. I don't know if you've ever been to a commercial or a large waste management style recycling facility. It's a very different type of setup that I'm a farm composter. You'll see some pictures of that later. But stuff gets really hot and some stuff doesn't get composted, and it's not as uniform as one would think. The long-term effect of using compost in your soil that has pesticide residue or herbicide residues on it is, one, it kills off biology, and two, that when you're growing it gets onto the up in through nutrient cycling and up into the cycling of nutrients up in through the plant. It gets into the green leafy tissue of the plants, and that is where it becomes a real hazard. So A, you're killing off biology. B, you're killing off potentially yourself. Chicken manure compost, another one. So that's a joke. That's my rooster's statue. Chicken manure compost is great if you are raising chickens at home. Okay, great, fabulous, love it. You're controlling the inputs, you're controlling, kind of scratch they're using, what they're eating. Hopefully they're eating all the great stuff on the bottom of your orchards and the what people call weeds that are grown organically in your garden, and all of your other veggie waste and stuff like that that's not going to the worms. That's all great. But when you get into chicken manure that gets into a bag that most bags people sell, it comes from conventional chicken farm, and that's CAFO environments. And those animals are fed GMO, corn, soy, alfalfa, and even wheat products, which is weird, but I'll talk about that in a second. And then over here, we've got mushroom compost being made, right? And the issue with mushroom compost is most of the people that do mushroom compost is the bedding that they use for the mushrooms. Most of it either comes from chicken litter, chicken manure, or from horse manure. And so that can be an issue too, because just what I just said about the herbicide residue, and with horse manure, you've got GMO alfalfa that's Roundup Ready that gets sprayed that horses eat. You have a lot of issues in terms of what the bedding is there. So it's another one. Just again, be careful. What about horse manure? People go, oh, I've got a horse facility up the street and I get all this manure I want for free. That's awesome. I grew up around horses, love horses, practiced natural horsemanship, fed my horses organically. Organic alfalfa is expensive. Organic horse feed is expensive, okay? And there's a reason behind that. 90% of the alfalfa grown in the United States is Roundup Ready. And that means they spray the crop and it kills the weeds and it doesn't kill the alfalfa. What happens is that has a huge half-life and it gets taken up in with the plant, and boom, it gets put into your garden. And when you think you're doing something fabulous, you may not. The other thing about horse manure that I don't love is that horse manure is very airy, very open. It allows a lot of weed seed in there. And if you know horses, right? So my horses, you feed them and like, it seems like seconds later they're pooping. Like, it's not even like, so the digestive tract of a horse is very, very limited in terms of what the breakdown is. So again, not my favorite animal manure to use as a compost. So we say no to GMOs. So what I was just saying to you about conventional ag byproducts, and by the way, they are byproducts, so it's part of, it's an offshoot of that industry. I am not a big proponent of conventional ag. I don't like the way we treat animals. I don't like the way we treat crops. I don't like the way we treat the soil. I don't like how we, in our university studies and all the stuff that goes on there, is so beholden to big money from big donors, big banking, big ag, big chem, big petro, big pharma. All of those guys are dictating the terms of what's happening in terms of what those studies that come out of large universities. And do you have a dog there, Ken?
I do. It's Nola. She's just kind of going around.
That's really cute. So I'm not a,
I thought you were going to talk about dog manure, and I was like, please don't.
no, I'm not going there. Yeah, I don't do dog manure or human manure. So if you're in a jungle, and you can make giant pits, anything goes. But like, while we're here and we're in, Urbania, we don't do that. Again, think about where all of the information is coming from, where the material is coming from. That's why more and more you'll hear from me. This is about organic tips, and I'm giving you some tips here, if you haven't caught on yet, what not to use. The Roundup Ready crops do not compost. They've got a big half-life. They end up in potting soils, compost, planting mixes, and other gardening products like meals, like, the different meals out there. So I never use bone meal. I never use blood meal. I never use feather meal. For what reason? Those animals, those poor, unsuspecting animals, are just fed the worst diets. They're not treated well. And you get the GMOs that go into their body, into their hair, into their blood, into their bone. And the other thing too, I think about a lot of times with these things, and I won't belabor this much longer, but I think about quality of life. So, the quality of life that these animals have is horrific. I know from where we are in terms of organic dairy farming, I know the quality of life that the cows have on our farms, really good. They get acupuncture. They have cow mattresses that go under the wood shavings that we bring in the loafing sheds. They've got, they have scratchers and misters, and they're out in pasture for longer than the 120 days that's required, for national, organic certification. So think about that when you also think about number 3 here is like, what do these things do to you and to your garden? What do you want to put in your garden? I want to put stuff that is clean, that's healthy, that's safe, doesn't have the fear of being in a confined, animal feeding operation. I want stuff as natural can be. Pesticides. So another reason I don't love the chicken manure thing, and I don't like that you can use conventional chicken manure in organic food production, because in a lot of places when they use pesticides to control insects in the commercial coops, and you spray that stuff in there, you clean that stuff out, you still have the residue everywhere. The animals get it, it gets on their feed. And then the last one I'll talk about is cottonseed meal. I never use it. It is one of the filthiest crops on earth. There's so much water pollution that's happened on this planet from planting cotton, and the pesticides that are used on it. It's something that, again, I never, ever use. Home composting. Big fan of home composting. Okay, so maybe, I help run a compost company, but like I want everybody composting. So that right there, you're looking at a picture of at our place in Thousand Oaks. You're looking at the compost bins that we built. We've got screened. They're about 4x4x4 screens on the top. And they're two different sides, and you can open the top and you can also pull open the sides. And what you're seeing on the right-hand side is we're adding in just some of the stuff that we had picked up off the ground in an area that day that needed some cleaning. Very much into the whole concept of, if you're not a home composter, or your home composter that's doing so, start with a 50-50 mix of greens and browns, see kind of where that goes. I don't use anything. I don't put food scraps much. I do a little bit of food scraps in there, but not a ton. A lot of people put way too many food scraps in for me. A lot of my food scraps go into our worm bin or into our bokashi buckets. So real farm-made compost. So that you're looking at compost over here on the left-hand side. That is a big pile of compost that is a windrow. That's a big long windrow, and that stuff is just about finished. The picture on the right actually is a picture of me turning a windrow with our tractor on our farm in Oregon. I love farm-made compost because I love that it's made on soil. It's made with really fresh. We use on our farm, we use dairy cow manure, organic dairy cow manure. I use wood chips that we provide for the farm for the cows to lay on. The other great thing about having wood chips in the loafing sheds for the cows is their incidence of cancer, of mastitis, goes down to 0 because of the oils on the wood. Really cleans them. It's fantastic. And then what also is in here is biodynamic preparations, 502 through 507, which are cool. Like this whole windrow gets sprayed with valerian. So love the energy, like on this farm. That's the farm in Oregon. We have another one down south. But the cool thing is the energy here, when you walk onto a place and there's like 5 acres or 10 acres of compost cooking really naturally in different states. It's a beautiful, high energy, wonderful, alive kind of a feeling. I get that same feeling with home composting. I love home composting. And the other thing too about home composting, I love screening everything. I love that point where everything is kind of broken down. It's hit that 10-month to 12-month kind of phase of static composting. And we take the 1/2-inch welded wire or 1/4-inch welded wire, and we make 2x2 screens, and we screen it, run everything through it and screen it through. And I take all that stuff that's finished, really comes out from the screening pile, and I use that in top dressing. And then I take the stuff that's still on top of the screen and throw it back into the compost pile. So composting and home composting. So this is actually, this is another picture of compost that's made in bins that are very similar to the bins that I just showed you. And what you're seeing is a lot of people look at that and go like, wow, that still looks pretty woody. Well, actually, the compost is really starting to break down. It's not going to ever break down to something that looks like coffee grounds or something that looks like that fine, like a worm casting will. What's nice about a good finished home compost, you also have pieces in it for aeration that still have some wood, and they're good fungal foods, and that still have bits of whence they where they came from, so that that helps in terms of aeration and in terms of adding organic matter into your soil in your garden, which helps build the soil, builds the strength of the soil, builds the composition. So for compost and composting, use only finished compost that you make at home, or that's real organic compost from the store. And again, for real, I want you guys to do some research. Malibu Compost makes real organic compost. Number 2 Organics makes real organic compost. See who else is out there that makes real farm-made compost that's really good? Check it out. Check the places out. And at home, make sure, the goal of growing organically is grow everything organically, so that everything you're putting into your compost pile, you are controlling the inputs and making really good organic compost at home. There's lots of other compost out there. I talked to you about city, green waste, chicken, mushroom. Not a fan of any of them. I like The homemade compost is really my green waste compost, and then I use the animal-based compost on my gardens from our farms. I like the organic dairy cow manure. I like the nutrient profile in there. I like the fact that it is very microbially diverse. I'm adding more biology into the soil, and it really it does a lot of great things for the soil in my beds. You're going to top dress all of your trees, plants, beds, and containers with a 1/16 of an inch to a 1/4 of an inch of compost this spring. You're going to do that. And I'm a believer in frequent dosing with compost, so I do that all the time. I do it as much as I feel like doing it. And if it looks to me like soil needs a little pickup, plants need a little pickup, I just go out there with a cup of coffee and you know, kind of sprinkle it around and water it in, and boom. And you think, like, what's that small of an amount going to do? Well, if you do it with frequency and you do it with really, really good compost, it's living soil, a lot. If you're going to make some soil or add to old soils, add 25 to 30% of your real organic compost, home or store-bought or mixed together, to recharge your old soil or to create new soils. The important thing, again, is always, when looking at your compost, what's in it. Here's just an example of top dressing a container. You know, one of our containers at the house, you know, putting down about a 1/4 of an inch there, get the compost down, and then basically we're going to water that in. Take a watering wand and give it a real nice, natural, normal watering. Vermicomposting. So this is a picture of one of the bins that we, you know, kind of bins we use. We have several of these, probably like 5 of them. These are, you know, you can get these all over the place. You know, the nice piece about this is we started, I'm showing you a picture of how we start them. We start them, we don't put paper in there. We don't put cardboard in there. I don't know where that whole concept came from, but I start my worm bins off with compost. And what happens is the worms eat the compost, eat the bacteria, eat everything that's in the compost, start to poop it out, create their castings. And then we start making lines down I start adding, we do a lot of juicing here. So I do juice pulp in lines all the way down. And then I bury it over, you know, once we put the worms into there. That little thing there that's on the little spout there on the bottom there, a lot of people say, oh, I use that for my worm tea. That's not worm tea, that's leachate. And I don't recommend using that as your worm tea, because what happens a lot of times, if you get too much moisture in there and too much stuff comes out of there, a lot of that's going to have anaerobic bacteria in there, which you don't want to introduce into your garden. So worm castings and vermicompost. So castings versus compost. Castings are the actual, you know, single poop from the worms. Very hard to get, you know, really straight castings. Vermicompost is when you've got, you know, like what I've got in my thing. I've got the compost in there. I've got the juice pulp in there. I'll put food scraps in there from the garden that I cut up or chop up, and those kind of become the food source in there, and it works really, really well. If you're worm composting at home or creating worm bins at home, awesome. I add castings to all my soil mixes at about a 5% minimum. And I also, when I'm amending, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, our beds, I will also add castings as one of, or vermicompost as one of the ingredients that I amend with. The thing to think about too is like what's in, you know, what's in the worm castings, what's in their feedstock. A lot of commercial worm growers and casting suppliers, what goes in there is cardboard, paper. You know, how do you know what's in the polymers in the paper? There's a lot of toxins in waxes that go into board. There's a lot of rodenticide, that kind of stuff, you know. So again, and this is a great example of like, this is like, you know, a typical day at my house where we're just juicing stuff a lot. And so we use juice pulp from our real organic sourcing to feed our worms. We chop, you know, organic food waste. from the harvest. As I was saying about the commercial, you got, cardboard, newspaper, trash. In what universe is that what worms are, really going to be dining on? A lot of toxins in there, a lot of rat poisons that go on to, get sprayed on boxes, on the bottom of boxes for stuff that gets shipped, especially if stuff goes overseas in terms of, and stuff that has, that's going to be brought in as food sources, which is terrible. And there's a lot of glue polymers that you don't want, also to introduce. There's toxins there. And also some of them, they add, manures that are toxic from the GMO feedstocks into their worm bins. Compost tea. So like my favorite thing, this is something that if you're not using compost tea, you definitely should be using compost tea. I call it the greatest cheat in organic gardening, and it's not really a cheat. It's just great. I say that because I had an elderly rose grower that used it as her secret weapon. Once we met and I talked to her about tea and sold her some compost tea bags, and she came back and told me that she won first prize. So it's not really a cheat. It's a great thing to do, and that's just a picture of one of our tea bags. They come in a coffee sleeve, and you can make, this is called the compost tea extract versus the people out there that know what an aerated compost tea is. I've done tons of aerated compost teas. I have brewers. I mostly do compost tea extracts. They're simple. You can make your own compost tea bags with just a paint filter bag or a micron filter bag. And just put your compost in there, put your castings in there, put some kelp meal in there, put a little fishbone meal in there, tie it off, and boom. You let it soak overnight. You go first, off gas your water if there's chlorine or chloramine in it. The chloramine won't off gas, but the humic acid that's in the compost will bind it. So off gas it, put your tea bag in, give it a good squeeze, give it a stir. Let it soak overnight, 8 to 10 hours, maybe 12 max. You want to keep that efficacy of it strong. And then you go ahead and you start to use it out in the garden. That I've just stirred. So you're seeing it's kind of got a little vortex stir going. I've got a cool little bamboo stir. And that's what I use all the time to stir up my compost teas. That's a nice looking tea brew right there. That's a real kind of Bach brew looking. That looks really good for an extract. And then the great things about compost tea, here's the list of what's great about them. That's me feeding a bucket out of our bucket, just feeding the trees in the orchard when they were really young, giving them that tea drench, and a drench is equal to a normal watering. So compost tea basics: 1, they feed your plants. Awesome. 2, they feed your soil. More awesome, because I care more about your soil than your plants, because if you've got healthy soil, you'll have healthy plants. They mitigate transplant shock, which is really important when you're planting. So if you're going to plant a bunch of stuff, really cool thing to do is make it a 5 gallons or 10 gallons, depending on how much you're going to plant, of compost tea the night before. And as you're planting those things, get them in the ground, give them a really good drench of compost tea. It'll help to mitigate the transplant shock that any plant that gets transplanted from one space into another, even a seedling. Stimulates root growth. I've had projects where I work on a lot of consulting projects, and the compost tea, we've had projects where we saw trees literally dying on projects that we were on, and we gave them root drenches of compost tea, and saw dieback stop on trees, because it gets right to the root, for uptake. The tea, because of the weight of the water and because it's liquid, it gets to the rhizosphere of the plants and is ready for immediate uptake into the plants. So stimulating root growth is really important for when you're also transplanting. And then wipes out powdery mildew as a foliar spray on tomatoes, squash, pumpkins, and roses. That's huge, because I don't know about you guys, but I live in an area where I get, you know, powdery mildew outbreaks. And so what I do all the time is I'll make up a bucket of compost tea when I see the powdery mildew start, and I spray it top and bottom, the stomatus, spray it everywhere, you know, on the trunks, on the stems, on the leaves, everywhere. It doesn't matter if they're fruiting, it's not going to hurt anything. It's not toxic. It's good. And also there'll be some uptake into the leaf structure of the plant that will also help feed the plant and make it stronger. It's also effective on rust and black spot. If you treat them immediately, you got to get right on them. You know, if not, you have to, like on the black spot, you got to cut it off, put it in a baggie, tie it up, and just put it in your trash can. Don't throw it in the green bin. Don't share. Don't spread the love. It also, I've seen it work on botrytis, on green beans and grapes and strawberries, and Phytophthora and Fusarium. So compost tea, and with those things, with the Phytophthora and Fusarium and also the botrytis, you got to get on it right away. It's not something like if it fully explodes, it's going to take a while to fix that, but you got to get on it right away. In your garden, so here's your tip. I want you to use this as a drench once a month, and a drench is equal to a normal watering on your roses, your flowering plants, and your fruit gardens. Once a month, you're going to use this from the spring all the way up to however long you're growing past, you know, for us, for where you guys are, Halloween and Thanksgiving even. So you can do that. You're going to drench your garden, the entire garden, 3 to 4 times a year. The other beds and even hedges, your landscape plants, your landscape trees. All you have to do for the trees is you're going to drench around the drip line. So where the leaves branch out to the edge, look down. Wherever that drip line is, do about 1 foot to 2 feet max around that entire drip line. Do it there. And if you want to have some extra tea and you want to get, because it's another great source of feeding your biology, you can also add a little bit or spray some on the soil that, oh no. Oops, sorry guys. That was not what I wanted to do. I clicked the button wrong. Okay. If you have lawn, great thing to do is to foliar spray them right now with lawn. I do a little bit of lawn for the dogs. So you know, get yourself a little 1 gallon or half gallon Hudson backpack sprayer and spray it down. Really good. If you feel like spraying your garden, great time of the year to spray it is in the spring. Really, really good. And again, you're going to foliar spray any diseases that outbreak, you know, in the garden. Here's just a picture of us, you know, putting the compost tea in the bucket. This is how we're putting compost tea into one of the raised beds. Really simple. Remember, once a month, you're going to do this with your roses, your flowering plants, and all of your raised beds and food gardens. So amendments. This is a really good time of the year to amend a little bit. And how I amend is really, really, really simple. So you're going to use simples, what is what they're called, like kelp meal, organic alfalfa meal for your roses. Make sure it's organic. Fishbone meal, make sure that's wild, sourced from cold water, seawater. Yeah, no farm raised fish, and a sustainably mined basalt. So you can even use like an azomite, you can use a Cascade Minerals. That's a really good thing to do. So you're gonna, you can also use, I like liquid seaweed and kelp extracts from cold water. I use the Atlantic brands. For that, like Neptune's Harvest is one. There's a couple of other good ones that are good kelp extracts. I also don't mind once in a while, like maybe 2 or 3 times a year when I'm not doing a compost tea spray or something else, I'll go out and spray the garden with the kelp extract in my little Hudson sprayer. Really good. Spray everything down. It's not going to hurt anything. It's only going to make things better and do a lot of feeding and a lot of strengthening of the cell wall and the tissue wall of the tissue of the plants. Again, on the fish, only use no farm raised, and sustainably mined and real organic in terms of the alfalfa, the kelp. Do not use, again, this is a refresher, do not use bone meal, blood meal, feather meal, or cottonseed meal. Why? Because of the GMOs. You're going to apply just a 1/16 of an inch, a small, just a sprinkling over the top of the soil. You put each of these on top of the other, add some castings to that over the top of that, and then add your compost, and then you water it in. You can also use those simples that I gave you to recharge soils. So let's say you're going to do, 5 cubic yards. No, that's actually a lot. Let's say we're going to fill up a normal raised bed. You will probably end up using about a cupful of each of these in mixing in to soil if you take that bed down about halfway and are adding new soil. Recharge the soil underneath it, add compost over that, water it in, and then add new potting soil. I know that Linkso carries these. These are all products that I use and like. From Down to Earth, that's their kelp meal. That's the Neptune's Harvest seaweed plant food. Bag soils. So this is one of my favorite things. Like, what is in your soil? What kind of soil are you using? Don't ever buy the cheapo stuff from Home Depot, from the Depot, or from Lowe's, or from any of those kind of places. They sell you the worst soil possible with the worst inputs. And then when you go to the nursery, like, it's like the usual suspects. Like, are there soils that every single store that you ever go into have? Why is that? Oh, probably because they've got lots of inputs, and those inputs are probably relatively suspect. So buy premium organic potting soil. That's what you want to do. This is a picture of with the Baby Boo's potting soil that Malibu Compost makes, of just topping off a raised bed. So every year, so like right now, if you look out at your raised beds and you haven't done it yet, in the spring, we'll see a lot of shrinkage because you'll have some shrinkage from the wood that's in there, shrinkage from the core, from the peat that's in there. And so the top of the board is called of the beds are called freeboard. So you'll see maybe even 2 inches, 3 inches, whatever, that far down. You want to leave about that much freeboard so you can do your amending throughout the year. But if you've got to top off the beds. And what I do before I do that is what I was just telling you about with the amendments. I will cover very lightly over the bed with amendments. I will then cover that with compost lightly, and then I will water that in. And then I go ahead and sometimes, if I'm not going to replant those raised beds for a few days or till the next weekend or whatever, I'll just keep watering that bed and getting it recharged, and even maybe giving it a compost tea if I'm going to grow intensively in those beds. And then I come back in and I'll top dress with my fresh, real organic potting soil. It makes a lot of difference, and you'd be surprised because, remember, our food crops are fast feeders, and they use a lot of nutrient. They draw a lot of nutrient out of the soil. And so the more that we can supply a good amount out the gate for those seedlings and those starts, the better. And then we keep using these protocols that I'm showing you to keep refeeding, remineralizing, and amending over the year, whether that's through liquid, through the compost tea, or from the top dressing. So green manuring and mulches, I love doing that too in the gardens and in different areas of the garden. I use cover crops like vetch and clover and rye. They're all great. I chop and drop those. I let some weeds grow in certain areas, like in the orchard and stuff like that. I let stuff grow. I cut it down before it goes to seed. And then what I generally do is I will cover that with a little bit of compost and water that and let that stuff really break down. It works really great. Your goal is to look at your property in totality, to look at how am I going to grow the soil on this entire property. You're not just growing the soil in the area where the rose is, or this tree is, or the hedges are there, or shrub here, or just where that plant is plunked down in your raised bed. You're trying to grow the whole garden as a living garden, a living organic ecosystem, right? So that's the reason you start to add things like, in certain areas that work well, use a green manure, something you can chop and drop. In terms of mulching, a lot of people are really into mulching. I'm not a huge mulcher. I use like organic straw, sometimes in areas like the berry beds, those kinds of areas, and I chip that down so it's really fine, so that I can also put compost on top of that, cover it, hit it with compost tea, let that stuff break down, and that works. We'll use also really fine wood chips that are clean, sometimes in the berry beds too, and in the orchards around the trees. We mostly use, like, we'll take our leaves and our shredded leaf compost. That's the main thing that I use as mulch. I find with wood, I use wood on the pathways. That works well for me. It's a natural, material on the pathways in areas where I'm not really trying to grow the soil as much, but it's not invasive at all. I did have someone at a class recently ask me about the colored mulch, and I was like, colored mulch? Like, you mean like my Uncle Louie's colored dyed hair? So no colored mulch. What is important about the mulches you're using? Again, so you're getting a concept here, which is always about what is it, how are we growing it, and how are things sourced, and where are they grown? And in my book, if they aren't real organic, then I don't use them. That's how much the road has narrowed for me. I'm going to do a quick thing here and shut the door. I'll be right back. Hi, Judy. All right, my wife just got home, sorry. So, beneficial insects. I'm hoping that all of you guys are using beneficial insects. In ground, this is something that's really important, because right now we're amending our beds, we're amending our soil. What I want all of you guys to do is, you'll do this now and you'll do this again, possibly in the fall, but I want you to get some nematodes. I've given you the list here, the HB nematodes and the SC nematodes. And I want you to buy those. You put them in you can't really see them, they're invisible, but you put them in your watering bucket and or can, and then you use them as a drench in your areas. And what they will do is they will kill the larvae of whitefly, thrips, leaf miner, aphids, fungus gnats, houseflies, grubs, which is fantastic, right? So if just that, if you only walked away with this, that's a huge thing, because if you start using nematodes in your garden, those things that are pests will eventually go away. They aren't going to, they'll go to a place where it's a weaker garden or a weaker ecosystem and attack that. If you create a strong ecosystem, you are less likely to be attacked. Above ground, you've got ladybugs, which I love, release them at dusk, miss the plants, and lacewings, which is what we're looking at here, like my favorite. We had a really cool thing happen with lacewings at our two houses previous. We had a couple of big shrub hedges at the entry of the front door, and when I got there one day, I saw a bunch of lacewings flying around, and then I'm going like, I wonder what they're doing here, because they're not, there's no aphids here for them to snack on. But what had happened is they were repopulating every year out of that same hedge, because it was a safe place for them. it was a good place for them. And so it was interesting. So for several years, I would just see the lacewing population spring up out of there. It was really, really cool. You can get these. They have cards with their eggs that you can place out into the garden. We do this a lot with the in the orchard. And they also have their larvae, but they're really tough to put out. So you can get the adults like this and that come in the containers, but you want to get really fresh ones, mist them, give them a little water before you put them out. This is actually releasing ladybugs into the garden. Now, I don't know where this potting soil thing came up from this way, but anyway, we're going to talk about potting soil. So, potting soil. What's in it? And is it really organic? Are your planting mixes? I don't ever use planting mix personally. I use potting soil a little bit. A lot of times I recharge soil if I'm taking soil out of the bed to recharge it, or to get grubs out of areas, or to recharge the soil below. So it's a more potent mix. It's in a raised bed. That's when I buy potting soil. How do you know what's in a bag? Flip it over, look at the list of ingredients. It goes from what's the most in a soil product to what's the least. And a lot of times you'll see things there and you wonder yourself, like, what actually is in there? Like, how much, stuff is really in there? And it's really interesting to get a sense of, like, if you see mostly wood, or you see core, or you see peat, that's the bulk of what's in your mix. Again, look at what is the humus component. Is it green waste? Is it chicken? Is it composted dairy cow manure, organic? What's in there? And then the other thing too is, like, look up the companies you're buying stuff from. Like, do you know anything about these people? Do they just have a bunch of pretty pictures and they look like, looks like the gardening version of the gardening section of Shutterstock? Like, who are these guys? Like, are they really organic? Are they greenwashing me? Are they telling me the truth? Is this somewhere that I want to spend my money on, a business that is sustainable, that's regenerative, that is doing things right? Or are they just, an offshoot of the big chem, big ag problem? And again, what's in it? That's like the biggest thing of all. Like, what is in, what's in the mix? Something is not right here. Hang on a sec, guys. That should have been. Well, all right. I'm just going to go with it. So back to the bugs. One of the things that I love to use in my garden that's really, really simple is I like using Dr. Bronner's peppermint soap. You go, it's a teaspoon to 5 gallons. It's really concentrated, but whitefly and aphids hate it. I've been on projects before. We have a project down in Oakland called the Morecambe Rose Garden. We had to spray down there because there was a wedding before, because there was a bunch of, they had a whitefly outbreak. So they really hate it. It's only a preventative, so it won't last. You need to use your nematodes in the garden, or your beneficial insects. But if you've got like an outbreak that just is overwhelming, great way to put these guys on notice of, hey, I'm not going to put up with it anymore. So happens, excuse me. The other thing I use, and it's a good time to put it out in the garden in spring. I don't know if you guys have ever used Tanglefoot on your orchards. Great thing to apply to the base of your fruit trees. The ants are going up them after the honeydew from the aphids. And so what you do is, you, at your base of the tree, I put down a cotton wrap, like a horse wrap or cotton gauze bandage, wrap it about 8 inches wide, and then I take the recycled saran wrap and put it around that, not too tight. And then I go ahead and brush on the Tanglefoot. And what that does is it'll stop the ants from going up. How you know you need to redo that is when all of a sudden the ants are walking over the rest of the ants that have succumbed to your Tanglefooting. You know it's time to change it out. And remember, wear rubber gloves, like the really good heavy dishwashing rubber gloves when you put out Tanglefoot. Ant bait stations. The other thing I do too is there's some really good ant bait stations out there that have like little microscopic amounts of boric acid in them and sugar water. And what happens is they take that back to the queen bee and destroy the colony. And so in areas where you have just insane amounts of ants, this works really, really well. Oh, there's an ant bait. There's the Ant Pro right there. That's the bait station. They're really, really good. And then there's prove my point from the last time I Tanglefooted. There's my glove. That's why you wear gloves when you're Tanglefooting. That stuff is really sticky. Pollinator gardens. So this is something that's really, really important in terms of what are we doing in our gardens, especially in an organic garden. We want to create areas where we attract pollinators, we bring pollinators in that also bring in beneficial insects, and they'll bring in the insects that will pollinate and the birds that will pollinate our gardens. When I first met Alan York at Benzinger Vineyards back in, might have been 2006, 2007 probably. I remember one of the things that really impressed me was the fact that in this vineyard they had a really nice pollinator garden that they were growing from the bottom of a ravine all the way to the top of this crest, and there were a ton of plants in there, natives, non-natives, and there was a lot of life in there. It was buzzing for sure. And I remember walking through there with Alan. In fact, that was the first place he took me to on the tour when I went there with him. And it really impressed me. And on every landscape that I designed after that, and that we installed and we built, I made sure that we put a pollinator garden into those gardens. Couple other things. A lot of people think this is like funny too, because I'm up here right now in Oregon, and everyone, they hate dandelion. And people do too in California. It's like, oh, it's in my lawn. I happen to love dandelion. And also we eat, we use dandelion in our salads, and it's a really, really good plant. It shows a lot of soil health actually in some areas. I love borage too. It's great. We plant that a lot around our orchard trees. Seed starting. It's not too late. We're still in, we just clicked out of February. We're getting into, time to, get the seed started. Because the other thing too is, in succession planting, you'll have stuff that goes out and you need to keep replacing it. So if you're looking for a good seed starter, there's a seed starter right there that I recommend. It's the one we make. It's organic and non-GMO. And I use a ton of it. We start a lot of seeds. The thing that's different about this and why I like it, the only reason I'm kind of plugging it, is it's got 25% of our Booze Blend compost in it. And what happens is most of the seed starters out there don't have any organic matter in them. And so what happens is there's not enough moisture to really help the plants, the seeds germinate. And then once they start, there's not nutrient in there to help the seedlings become really strong. That's why we created this. This came from an idea. We made a lot of seed starter and microgreen growing mix for several guys that grew a lot of the microgreens for Whole Foods. So they were getting very minimal runs out of their seed starter and microgreen grow. And so, you can get 5 or 6 runs out of this. It's really, really good stuff. And So I just say, if you're going to, start seeds, why not start real organic and biodynamic seeds into seedlings? Harvesting. So a lot of us here, I'm assuming, are growing organic gardens, organic food gardens, right? So one of the things that's important is, let's harvest. Don't wait. Don't wait till the pests want to jump on them. Don't wait till things start to wilt or things have moved past their moment of maximum nutritious value. One of the things I love about growing a food garden is I'm always out in the garden looking at everything, like, what can I munch on next? Like, that is literally, like, that's one day of us just, grabbing lunch, on the left, and that's me just, picking a mulberry off of the mulberry tree. And like, one of the things I love about having like different fruits in the garden too, is you can just kind of walk around, and like our grapevines and stuff, I can just walk around, and like, that's where I can snack right there with real organic food. That's really healthy food, so harvest. And the other thing is, when you're harvesting, if you have some of the waste, if some of the lettuce has gone bad, or it's hasn't done as well, that's the stuff you can throw into your compost bin. Do that, use it. Make sure that, if leaves have blown off, like your mulberry tree or whatever, put them back down around the base of that tree, give it a natural mulching. Again, with harvesting, harvest, get stuff out, as it's good, use it, like we're harvesting right there to go, make a juice. We're going to make a juice. We're going to juice that. We grow lots of celery. We grow lots of radishes. We grow lots of stuff. And the other thing too is, when you're planning your garden out, like, what do you guys eat? Don't plant stuff. You go to nurseries a lot of times and you see stuff and see starts, and it's like, oh, I want this, oh, I want that. And then nobody eats it. So for us, what we've done over the years is really kind of break down to, like, what do we use? What do we like? If we're going to have people over for dinner, what would be cool to have as a special thing that we grow that nobody has in their garden, or that they're not going to get at a restaurant, something that's, like that. So we do that all the time as well. But harvest, and when you're juicing, use all the celery. Use all of it. When you're juicing your carrots, use all of it. Don't just, don't cut the tops off. Use it, juice those. That's where a huge amount of your nutrient is. And last thing on harvesting, it's like, I didn't put it in here and I meant to, but like deadheading, we have a lot of roses on our property. And so we deadhead a lot. So I want more bloom. I want to keep bloom going. And a lot of people, because I have healthy roses, because I use compost tea on them, I foliar them, I drench them, once a month with my tea. I use the compost on them. I have really healthy roses, so I compost them. Compost what's coming off of your roses and your flowering plants too. Once you get everything in balance and you have everything that's super healthy, use all of it. Use everything that's on your property to your benefit. So here's 12 things to remember. This is probably a good screenshot. Compost the entire garden every spring at least a quarter of an inch, just a quarter of an inch of finished organic homemade compost or booze blend compost. You can mix the two. You're going to top dress that. And then the other thing you're going to do is you're going to water it in. Activate the compost. Compost tea the whole garden every quarter, except winter and cold climates. You're not going to do that, but I keep teeing our garden like where we are in Oregon. So I'm in Oregon right now, and we just had snow. The snow just melted. I'm coming down to California in a minute. I'll be down there for a couple weeks, and I'm expecting when I get back to be ready to start compost teeing. And putting out compost on the property here. We just got done the freezes, so unless we have another late season snowstorm, it's going to start changing here so that the temperatures of the soil are going to start to get up. So the other thing too to let you know about that is your soil temps. The soil temperature can be 5-10 degrees warmer than your air temperature. So as you know, the microbes will still be active, you know, in 40s and 50 degrees, 60 degree soil. They'll get active. The warmer it gets, they love soil in the 70 degrees to 80 degree range. So as your soil starts to warm up, as your climate starts to warm up, the biology will get more active. Number 3, top dress with kelp, alfalfa, fishbone meal, green sand. You've got some mineral, some rock phosphate, oyster shell, worm castings. A 1/16 of an inch over the plots, your beds, your containers, and planting areas. Every spring, cover it with a 1/16 of an inch of booze blend compost or your homemade compost, and water that in. Really going to make doing that, and then coming back with your teas and your top dressing, and the occasional spray of the kelp is fantastic. And then 4, top dress all of your garden areas with a handful of real organic compost as often as you like to build soil health. You know, you don't need a chart, you don't need a graph, you don't need, just go out there with a cup of coffee and throw some compost around, water it in, enjoy the garden, look at everything, see what's happening. You know, feel your soil. Is it changing? Is the complexity of it changing? In your stuff in the ground, you know, can I actually pick up a handful of soil, or is my soil still, you know, concrete? If you do what I'm talking about here, and you've got soil that's concrete, or you have really dense clay soil, this will fix it. 3 to 4 weeks after your amending of the planting areas, you're going to drench all of those amended planting areas with compost teas. You can buy the Malibu teas, you can make your own tea. A drench equals a normal watering. After you amend or prep your beds and raised beds, and add your beneficial nematodes in as a soil drench. So get those guys going as you're planting, and as you're getting new tender, you know, you'll see, you know, the light tiny leaf out in your plants. Start looking for your aphids and your whitefly, and if you've got those, make sure you get your nematodes in, and then start putting out the beneficial insects once you spot any of the pests. Please plant a pollinator garden. Up your home compost game. If you're not making good compost at home, keep trying other things to make it better. For in-ground planting, you know, you can use this mix. There's a couple of mixes here. You can go a third, which is a third booze blend, a third baby booze potting soil, and a third native soil. Or you can go half booze blend, or half booze blend, half your compost, and half native soil. Hand watering. I really love hand watering because we can control where the water goes and how much water is there. You know, we don't want to flood stuff. Recently, we've had so much rain everywhere that, you know, we're not in the same boat we were last year. But hand watering is a great way to almost even like get meditative in your garden, where you get under stuff. You're not getting water all over things that are going to create fungal disease. Don't spray everything with your wand. Get it close to the soil, make it light, you know, keep it so it's as close to natural rain, not atmospheric river rain, but like normal rain. It's much better. It's much better using that ultimately too than irrigation, you know, oversprays all the time. I'm not a huge fan. And drip irrigation, I think, is overrated. What I don't like about drip, and why you can use it, but like, remember, in the areas you're not using drip, the goal is, again, to create an entire organic ecosystem, right? So what we want to do is we want to water those areas that we're not necessarily getting with our irrigation, so that we're able to have biology, soil biology everywhere, and that we're growing that, and we're harboring that. That's what we want to do. And then lastly, foliar spray any fungal outbreaks immediately with compost tea. Get on that right away. Make your 5-gallon bucket or 10-gallon, 2 5-gallon buckets, and just get out there, let it soak overnight, and then spray it. That's pretty much it. That's me with Honeyboo. You can please follow Malibu Compost on Facebook or Instagram. You can check out number2organics.com, which is our partner company. They're a great company. And probably one of the best reclamation and recycling projects that's organic in soil that there is. So nice thing to follow. The last thing I'll mention is I gave Ken my personal email if anybody wants it. We have a book coming out, and that would be nice if you're interested. So you can reach out to her and she'll forward that information to me. So thank you, everybody.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Randy. So we've got a whole bunch of questions here. So let's just go through them from the beginning.
Okay.
Let's start at the very beginning where you mentioned the organic movement. This is more of like a statement, maybe your personal take on it, but can be brief and we'll move on to other questions. But do you think the organic movement or the market is that wholesome and true to its initial intent, especially if large ag businesses are at the helm? Obviously, they get involved because it has become a large money-making venture. So just want to know your opinion on that.
Absolutely not. I think that the organic needs a makeover. That's partly one of the reasons what I've written about. So I think that we have to take matters into our own hand, grow food at home, compost at home, know the companies we're buying from, don't buy from companies that have connections or ties to big chem or big ag. And this also goes to the garden experts with quotes around that, who there's a zillion garden people that are teaching all kinds of gardening and all kinds of stuff all over the place. And what are they doing? Where are they getting their inputs? Are they sponsored by somebody? Are they, a lot of garden blogs, are sponsored by all kinds of shows and are sponsored by different companies. Know who you're getting your information from and know where you're sourcing your material from. We grow so much food and we do so many things because of, I think, the lack of responsibility of the industry as a whole. I'm happy that regenerative ag is coming along. But again, look at the door on that too. How many people from other large ag concerns or entities are involved in that? There's the whole Real Organic project, which I like a lot. I like biodynamic agriculture, but it's still very cloistered. Even all these years later, it's still a very cloistered environment. So do as much as you can do, make compost, have worm bins, grow food, create that space that, hold that space in your neighborhood or your town. That is that beautiful place where the butterflies and the birds and the bees and come and the animals are happy to be there and you're happy to be there, and it creates an energy. And then you can then share that, especially post COVID. I was just talking about that today with one of the buyers from an organic mostly market up here up in Oregon called New Seasons. And we were having some business discussions, but we were talking about how people they want to start having classes again and start doing stuff again, because they feel like everybody's kind of sectioned off. And since COVID, we aren't as connected as we used to be. And so if you're growing organically, give some food away to people, show people how to do it, share your leaf compost, take somebody's leaf litter if they've got too much and make some leaf compost. Get in touch, get in contact, let's get human again. That's my answer.
That's awesome. Thank you. So the next question is a two-parter here. Should compost require additional fertilizer or the addition of fertilizers before it's being used, or should it be ready to use? And what should we avoid putting into compost? So someone told me that you should stay away from some hardwood chips like walnut because they're toxic. So this person wants to know your answers.
Okay. First of all, yeah, you shouldn't have to add. Okay, so I don't fertilize. So going through the whole presentation I just gave you, I gave you a way that I garden. and that we grow, and even grow crops that way. We use very, small inputs, and because we use stuff that's real, because we make real compost that's loaded with nutrient, that's loaded with biology. So if you're using something that's real, the reason that we have to use stuff, because, and I'll go back to the last point about what we inputs in there, but like the reason, like, you're being sold potting soils and soils by, these companies that have ties to big ag and big chem, is because, and the reason that you have to fertilize those things are because the humus component in that soil isn't efficient. If you use compost, which is the most important thing that you can do in your garden, and you create good compost, and you make some decent worm castings or worm compost, and you use a lot of compost tea because you got good compost, you will have all the nutrient, all the minerals you'll need. The microbes in your soil will mineralize the rest of the organic matter that's in your garden, and you will have a living ecosystem. In terms of what not to put in, there's a laundry list of those types of things. I try to just go for the most basic things, like what is in my space, what's in my immediate space that I can compost, especially for my home composting. I'm home composting basically, some of the lawn clippings from my lawn that we have for the dogs. I'm using leaves that drop from my trees that I don't leave on the lawn over the winter. I've got enough leaf litter that I can, I have some for my compost bins. I use some of my food waste, and basically like when we do our pruning and stuff like that, I have an electric shredder that's really cool, and I'll shred our trimmings and use most of those, but they're in smaller doses, so I don't have anything here. So my point being, try to use stuff that's from your garden, and try to use stuff, if you have read something is toxic, don't use it. If something is historically, like down in Southern California, I don't use eucalyptus. And I had a bunch of eucalyptus on my property, but I had a lot of sycamore. I had a lot of other, I had oak trees. Oak tree leaves make incredible leaf mold compost. There's things that people have told you, oh, it's too, those leaves are too hard. Don't believe all the wives' tales. Do a little bit of research too on your own. And if you have questions, you can always reach out. And honestly, there's a lot of ways, the project I've been working, the book thing I've been working on too for a while, has a lot of information about this.
Thanks, Randy. So we'll move on to a next question here. This is regarding green waste compost and the municipal green waste compost. Do you think that systemic pesticides like neonics are appearing more in these green waste composts, thus making them more toxic to use?
I do. And I think that what's happening is because, again, it's what I said, during the presentation, is that we have so many gardeners out there, and so many different people who actually aren't even gardening, they're just landscaping, right? That are putting spraying so many different chemicals and different pesticides and fungicides and herbicides on things, and then just putting them into the green bin without even a thought, and then putting their dead weeds in there without a thought, or had an insect outbreak and sprayed everything down with an insecticide, and then cuts it off and puts it in the green waste bin. The levels of toxicity, first of all, for a lot of those things, you're not gonna compost that out. And ultimately, when you get that green waste into, and it gets to it, and it's touching your soil, eventually all that stuff will break down or get into the aquifer. But the damage that it does before it gets to there, to your native biology, and potentially to the plant life that you have there, and the biology around the rhizosphere of the plants, is too great. It's at too great of a cost. So it's, again, wonderful idea. I think we really, as a planet, need to figure out the trash issue and the recycling issue, because I don't think where we are right now, I feel like we're like cavemen. That's just my opinion.
Thanks, Randy. Can you explain what biochar is and how it could be used, or if you use it in the composting process?
Yeah, I mean, I generally, biochar helps in terms of its carbon source. Biochar helps ultimately as a charge also for organic matter and for compost. I've used biochar. Biochar, interestingly enough, too, in potting soils also. It also helps with the with electric conductivity. It drops EC levels and salt levels, so it helps balance it out. It's something that you can use. You guys sell, I know you sell a really good biochar. It's something that you could use, a couple times in the garden. A lot of people use a lot more. I know I have friends that make biochar, and I've only used biochar in my gardens a couple of times. I do use it in the potting soil. I think it's good to use there, because that's something that's a transitional soil. It's not, I'm trying to just build the soil in the in-ground portion of my beds and in my garden as naturally as possible. But I have used biochar as a top dress and then covered that with compost. And I think it's has a lot of value, in correct dosage.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this is a statement and a question following. This person lives in Los Angeles and have a city compost bin, and they put food scraps and gardening materials in that, and has taken years to turn that into compost. Is turning it the key, and how can they get it to break down faster?
Yeah. So if it's one of the plastic bins like that they give out from the city, those are tough. So what I tell people to do if you're going to compost at home, so the reason that we made those bins the way we made them is that it allows airflow. What you're not getting in the bins that a lot of the cities are putting out is enough airflow. You need oxygen. And the other thing that happens, so yes, you do need to turn, and you need to make sure that your moisture content, it's not too dry and it's not sopping wet. It can't be goopy or it's not going to break down. You have to have like a moisture content where you can fletch stuff and it will break apart. It can't be like a thing or just like dust. So that's one of the biggest things is the proper moisture management in home composting, and then getting enough air. And if you've got stuff that's just kind of sitting there, if it has enough air generally and enough moisture, it'll break down correctly. And also the other thing is you might not have if a lot of it is food scraps. It depends, what the carbon to nitrogen ratio is. So a lot of times people that put a lot of food scraps in, it's got a lot of moisture to it. There's a lot of water content to that, and there isn't enough carbon and not enough leaf matter or wood matter to correctly compost. So those are things too. Trial and error too, really good when you're working at home. It's how you'll find the sweet spot with the material that you have.
I think you just answered my next question, which was this person making compost at home in a bin. When they dig it out to screen it through a mesh, it seems to be very moist, and there are plenty of worms in it, and it seems to be very sticky and difficult to screen. So the suggestion is, add some carbon matter essentially, right?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. And then where are the wood chips coming from, and where should folks buy some?
Well, for me, like at home, Norma and I bought an electric shredder. It's really cool. It's a little thing. It's not a big deal. And we have our fruit trees and we prune and we do our prunings. And I have some of my landscape trees. And so I use some of my own stuff at home. We shred stuff. So that's where we get the wood. For us, like when we're making big scale compost, I get it from the forest department, and like we use things like ash, some fir, stuff like that. That's pretty innocuous wood in composting and works really really well. Um, um, Rather alder is one of the things I use. We get a lot here in the forest in Oregon. So, but at home I just use what I've got for the chips, and it works well. And I use that. We'll use that also as our mulch around our berries and that kind of stuff as well.
Okay, awesome. I know you had mentioned kelp and basalt. This person's wondering if the kelp and the basalt would be good for vermicomposting. And if so, how many times would they have to add?
I don't add it to the compost or to the vermicompost. I just add natural food sources there. What I do is I add those things to the top of the soil or the top of the beds or in beds when I'm amending them. I only add them that way. I don't like adding. I only like adding food stocks into the in the worm bin.
Okay, thank you. Are there such thing as organic grow bags? We would love to grow in bags, but because our garden, or because we'd love to grow in bags because our gardens have grubs.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would love to know if these guys have used the nematodes to attack the grubs, because they work really well. I don't know about the organic grow bags. Honestly, most of the grow bags that I know, because they're made, the material they're made out of is, not from an organic source. I don't know. I just use nematodes, and a lot of times when I'm like changing out the soil in my beds, when I find I'll dig down in there and see if I've got grubs in there, and I pull them out to the best of my ability, but I really just let the nematodes go after them. And that's what I do, but I don't know, that'd be another thing to research. I don't know about the grow bags.
And what's a good nematode product? I know you had put up some nematodes, but
the two you want to use are the HC and the SB. But the SC nematodes and the HB nematodes, excuse me.
Okay.
I reversed my talk, my speech.
Randy, this is pretty much nationwide, right? It doesn't matter if you're in California or Oregon or Florida,
Right.
Nematodes just are pest specific almost. Is that right?
That's the other thing too, is, a lot of times too, like we'll buy stuff when we go into projects. I do a lot of stuff with a company called Rincon Vitova. They have a pretty cool website too that you can get in terms of just like, if you have a specific pest going on there, and Dr. Ron and those guys are pretty cool. So we just because we were down close to them, formed a relationship and just have used their insects on hundreds of jobs.
So this person has been contaminated, or the garden has been contaminated with root knot nematodes.
Mhm.
They plan to use crab meal and sun solarize the raised beds, but not all of their beds can be solarized. Do you have any suggestions for them?
Wow. One of the biggest problems with that type of a nematode issue is it tells you that the soil that was in there was very out of balance, and the garden was out of balance, and so that they didn't have, that there weren't natural predators to effectively combat them, and to use, as a food source, go after them. So I've heard of what they're talking about doing. I've never done it, so I don't know. how that would work. For me, what I'm doing is I keep trying to bring more biology, more food sources to bring in as many different colonies into the soil as I can, because they are generally my first line of defense. So I haven't had that issue. I've never had to deal with that issue. I wish them luck. I think, just if once they've done that, I would replace their soil with really, really healthy soil. That's loaded with biology, really living biologic soil.
Alrighty. There's a slide that you put up, Randy, with, let's see, I forget now, but with the black cow organic manure. Is black cow organic manure good to use? I'm not sure what that question is intending, but maybe a slide that you had used.
Black cow. I think Black Cow is a brand, right?
What's that?
Is Black Cow a brand?
I'm guessing, maybe the person can clarify, but I'm not
So,
sure.
okay, so if it's a brand, again, so here we go, we research it, right? Like, where are they? Who are they? Are they making their stuff on a farm? Are they part of an organic dairy? I know there's another company that's something cow that is called cow, but it doesn't have any, it has green waste in it, from a municipal green waste site. So I go, wow, that's where I found that at. I was like, that's really cutesy marketing, but that's really deceptive. So just look, just find out who these guys are, and are they making real organic stuff? And go past the first 3 hits on Google or whatever your search engine is, DuckDuckGo, and you'll start to find stuff if you do a little bit of research about the products you're using. And I think that's really good, because we should know what we're using. We should have some sense of comfort with what we're using in our garden, especially if we're growing food, especially if we have animals, or we have kids, or we have, people around there that, are sensitive environmentally. It's important to know what's out there.
Alrighty, so the next question is, can you use bone and blood meal in your flower garden? This person had already bought it and they can't return it.
Well,
As long as it's
I'm not going to judge. I'm not judging here, right? Okay, so I remember I was a landscaper of, I was a 10th degree black belt in, killing stuff and poisoning stuff, and I had to unlearn everything. Okay, so I'm no one to judge. I will not throw stones. If you want to, go ahead. I would definitely cover it with compost and, get it in, or, I don't know, see if I guess, I don't know. Yeah, I guess that's, I personally just don't ever use any of that stuff anymore. But that's like, just, you do what you think is okay for you. And then maybe next time you won't use it. Maybe next time you'll switch over to something else, or use one of the other methodologies we talked about. So just, people need to do what they're comfortable with, and, don't want to be wasteful and all that stuff. And I am sensitive to that too. So I get it.
And in all fairness, they did mention flower garden, so I'm guessing it's not very,
I totally get that. I get that. I just, I guess for me, yeah, you're right. Like, I started where, it was the food garden first, the orchard, the food garden, then it started to, go out for me. Right. So that's kind of how it worked for me, that, and now the whole garden is now, every inch of property that we're on is 100% real organic.
awesome.
Didn't start that way, got that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's kind of switch over to compost tea. This is specifically for Boost Compost Tea. This person wants to know, what are your additives for your compost tea, and do you use tap water and at what temperature?
So basically what we do to make compost tea, like in the tea bags I showed you, we re-screen the compost so it's finer for the little micron organic cotton micron bags we use. And we spray the compost again with a mix of the biodynamic preparations in a tea form and let it dry. That makes the tea very fast acting. And then depending on what type of tea is, on a couple of them we add castings, one of them we add kelp, one of them we add organic alfalfa. So that's what we add to it. Other than that, that's all that's in there. And as far as the water goes, yeah, you can totally use tap water. I recommend off-gassing it overnight. And if it's really cold, you really kind of want it to be a in the at least in the 60, 50 to 60 at the coolest, up to like 70. So that's really kind of it. You don't want it to be freezing cold, so because then the biology in it is not as active as you want it to be.
Okay, awesome. And then I know there's a question coming here when you had mentioned off-gassing the water, the tap water. Maybe you can explain what that means. And I know some people use humic acid to sort of dissipate the chloramines in the water as well, so.
Yep, that works really well. And then you can just put the water that you're going to use for your tea in a 5-gallon bucket or a couple 5-gallon buckets and just let it, that's what we do, let it just sit in the garage, or if it's really cold out, I'll just bring it into the house to the entry to the front room where I've got, like a stone floor, something that not a wood floor, and just put the buckets on there and just let them sit overnight and just, dissipate.
Okay, awesome. So a couple more questions here and then we'll wrap up. What is good organic straw? This person seems to have a hard time finding this or finding organic straw where they live, and they actually live in Florida, by the way. So do you have any good source for organic straw or any other alternatives perhaps?
There's there's a company out of Canada now that sells into the United States. I can't remember their name, but they make packages of shredded straw. One of them is organic, one of them is not. So I think if they look for that source out of Canada that makes the shredded straw product, they'll be able to find a source, because they sell all over the United States. And a lot of the distributors, I know we sell our stuff down in Florida through a distributor. And I know my big distributor that's nationwide also carries that company.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what is your take on direct composting? And for those who don't know what direct composting is, it's when direct composting is you dig a hole and chop up materials and let it compost naturally. I haven't heard of that. Maybe that's something, well, now that I remember, my grandma used to just dig holes and throw greens in there and bury it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
and then versus the flip side, which is hugelkultur, which you build it up above the soil. So I think that's fine. I mean, one of the things that we do, kind of a version of that, is we use bokashi in a bucket, and we put different scraps and stuff in there, and 6, 7, 8 weeks down the road, we'll go out and take little pits in different areas and bury that in there. And it's loaded with biology, and it's a really good source of food for the earth. So I think it's fine, you know, it's a little more labor intensive, but it's pretty simple and it works. Again, it's what's the source of the material. If you're growing it at home and it's grown organically and it's, you know, or you're buying, you know, food at a store that's grown organically, you know where it's coming from. It's not riddled with pesticides or herbicide. I think it's a fine alternate source of composting.
Alrighty, so here's the last question for you. Is it good to have bee pollinator stations to attract bees in your garden?
Yeah, bee houses. Sure, you know, why not? You know, you have to realize sometimes, like depending on where the setting is, I've worked on a, you know, well, I know for one for sure, a project my wife worked on, where it got a little scary for the folks there, that all of a sudden when you have a lot of bees, you know, traveling in their, you know, in their airspace that happens to now be their airspace is in your garden, it can be a lot, and they got really scared and got freaked out. And then, you know, when they had the African bee scare and all this other stuff that's happened. So I think it's a great, I mean, at the end of the day, what a better thing for us to do than create situations for pollinators in our garden, and to share the space, and to share, you know, to work work it together.
Yeah, well said. Well, Randy, thank you so much for being here today, and thank you everyone for attending. Do you have any closing remarks for the folks that are watching or will be watching in the future? Because this is being recorded, so.
I'm really excited, like that you guys took the time to get on this, and I always appreciate, you know, being invited to talk about these things. I think we're at a really critical point in organics where, as I said earlier, I think we need to take things into our own hands, because we can't, if there's been one thing I've learned over the last couple of years, I cannot rely on the powers that be to, you know, have my best interests or my family's or my friends or my loved ones or my tribe's best interest at heart. So I have to do the things that I know that I can do that can make a difference. And I believe that each one of us can make a difference still. I'm not ready to go to Mars with Elon Musk. You know, I want to fix here first.
Thank you, Randy. Your talks are always so inspiring, honestly. They're so cool. And I can't wait for your book to come out. So we'll be in touch. Thank you again for a fantastic class. This will be available on our website and on YouTube as well. Follow Randy on Facebook and Instagram as well. Any questions you have, just email us and our Randy, and we'll get back to you. Thanks again, Randy, and thanks everybody for attending.
All right. Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Ken.